want to ask a question related to the third point on the OCS Governors Coalition. Improved understanding of what potential revenues could mean for states. Now, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, in 2006, you were granted a share of federal revenues. I know the state of Virginia has had a number of statements on the desire to understand more and to get engaged in that process, as has the state of Alaska. First, I'd like to get a perspective from the Gulf Coast states on and I think Commissioner Patterson, you referenced a little bit in your opening comments, but a little bit on the impact that has meant, particularly in this time of tight budgets, tight state, local, federal budgets, and ultimately what revenue sharing could mean if it were allowed to continue in a robust way in other states, what that could potentially mean for jobs and economic development throughout the country. So,
well, if you commit to revenue sharing, as the feds have done in CIP, Coastal Impact Assistance Program, GOMESA, and 8G, I don't know if that's applicable to all coastal states, but that's a provision, revenue sharing in those transitional waters between state and federal waters. If you commit to sharing revenue, that's great, but you also have to produce there. I mean, commit to share some of the royalty income and you don't make any royalty, then it's all talk and no dollars. But it means a big impact because we made $1 billion in state waters. And of course, state waters are impacted by federal activity. Even though the moratorium, purgatory, whatever you want to call it, was in deep water, however that was defined, it didn't technically affect any of our submerged lands out to 9 nautical miles because it's all shallow. I don't think any of it's over 100 feet. That whole slowdown in economic activity, when your drilling companies, many of them, or your offshore exploration companies are located here in Houston, they have facilities in Louisiana, they have crews out of Louisiana, so it's all interconnected. So it impacted tremendously the economy of Texas, even though we weren't directly impacted by the spill. And of course, the royalty income in Texas is dedicated to public education. And that relieves the states of the burden of using tax revenue, general revenue, to fund public education to some extent. And then, of course, there's the overall no-brainer that more drilling results in more jobs. More jobs, as folks spend money. Ad valorem taxes increase, sales taxes increase, all of that. Unemployment tax rates go down, whether it's because there's more employment. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I can tell you it's pretty damn simple that if you start spending money and producing in the Gulf of Mexico, the states benefit directly and indirectly.
Governor Barber?
No, I was just going to say, I understand this phases in, and it's going to be greater revenues in the future. Some limitations right now, what we're spending revenue on. CIP, you mentioned the coastal improvement project. But it is healthy. I mean, for the land leases for umpteen years, the states have participated, and it's only fair that the Gulf states, and I guess Alaska, that the offshore, the OCS, is kicking in. In the out years, it's going to have a whole lot more impact. That's why I said in my opening statement, the bigger thing to me is what the commissioner was just talking about, is the effect on the economy. 15 years from now and further out, you're going to see much more fiscal impact on the local and state governments.
Secretary Angel?
I would say that one of the things that's very, very important for folks in the offshore business to really fundamentally understand is that other than taxes, the number one revenue generator for the federal government or federal revenue is oil and gas income from federal property. And I think that's something that we need to be very proud of. We need to be able to repeat. We need to be able to push back. And a very small portion of that is actually shared with the states. And that's unfortunate because when we have a lot of federal lands in the western part of America, the law of the land is that 50% of the royalties that are generated on emerged lands that are owned by the federal government, 50% of those royalties are shared directly with those host states without an appropriation of Congress. This is a direct pass-through. So you're talking about Wyoming and New Mexico and Colorado, and I'm very happy that they get it. I think they ought to get it. I think it's a fair distribution of revenue sharing that for hosting the activities, bearing some of the burden that these states would get 50% of those revenues. However, that is not the case for offshore properties. And so while the Congress has adopted some legislation in 2006, it hasn't been enough. We need more. And if you want Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida, and Georgia, and other states on the East Coast to be able to open up their properties, then it seems like to me we ought to be sharing with them a portion of the revenue that the federal government would get. Because again, they're going to have to host some of those activities. There's going to be some infrastructure needs that are going to need to be taken care of. And that's the kind of public policy I hope the governor's OCS group that Governor Barbour announced today can help, really marshal, because it's time that we begin to share with all states the revenue that comes from offshore production.
Secretary Dominic, from Virginia's perspective.
Well, of course, for us, sorry, it's so loud all of a sudden. It's all an estimate of what kind of revenue we might get, and of course we have to battle both to get the sale as well as get the revenue sharing. But those are the main things that we're interested in: is developing our industry, the onshore support part of that industry. We're ready to do everything we can in the state waters to transmit oil and gas through that area. So for us, it's an opportunity both for jobs and for investment, and as well as the opportunity to get some funds that will help, like every other state. We have tight times in Virginia as well, although we have a small surplus at the moment. But it is a potential that we want to exploit if possible.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, I think from the federal revenue perspective, at a certain point we'd like to make sure that each state is treated the same. And I think there's a lot of general agreement on that. And as I mentioned in my remarks, I think one thing that is very, very important to recognize, particularly at the time of significant federal budget deficit challenges, is what Secretary Angel said was just how much the federal government stands to gain from increased OCS development. That one study I mentioned by the University of Alaska makes those estimates close to about $200 billion. I mean, the numbers are huge.